My first week at Pine Gulch was mostly paperwork and silence. Pine Gulch isn't a national park you'd recognize from postcards. It's 240,000 acres of granite spines and black pine, wedged between two counties that don't agree on much, except that lost people turn up on our side. We're thinly staffed, so rookies get real responsibilities fast. Night shift fastest of all. The orientation binder was older than me. It smelled like wet cardboard and stale coffee. In it were the usual things: radio protocols, trail maps, a list of volunteer SAR phone numbers, and then a stapled addendum, photocopied so many times the letters looked like ghosts. The addendum was labeled in Sharpie, Fire Season Night Rules. Below that, 9 bullet points. I read them once, smirked at the vibe, and read them again. 1. Between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m., do not answer any call that gives only a first name. Wait for dispatch to patch or a callback number. 2. If you hear a second tone on the pager that you weren't expecting, do not respond on air for 30 seconds. Count out loud. 3. Trail mile markers sometimes count down when they should count up. If you notice this, reverse course. Do not rationalize. 4. Do not speak the word help on the radio after midnight unless you mean it literally. We've had issues. 5. If the lookout at Wedge Peak calls and says he can see you, he cannot. Wedge Peak Tower was decommissioned in 1998. 6. If the wind shifts and you smell wet fern when it hasn't rained in a week, do not breathe deeply. Turn your head and keep walking. 7. Do not follow a flashlight that is bobbing above knee height. 8. If you must hike at night and pass a trail register that has your own name written twice, leave immediately by the path you came. 9. At dawn, if the birds are silent for more than 1 minute, get low and cover your ears. Half tradition, half hazing, my supervisor, Grant, said when he slid me the binder. He was one of those lean, permanently wind-burned men the woods carve out of you. You'll laugh until you don't. I laughed anyway. Then he put his thumb on the 5th rule, the one about Wedge Peak, and said, "No, really, don't answer him." I wanted to ask him who, but the phone rang and he waved me toward the side door. "Night Rover's yours tonight. Easy hours. Walk the campground loops. Keep the fire pits cold. You'll be fine." He said it like a promise, or like a prayer. The first 2 nights were uneventful, if you don't count the way the forest sounds different after midnight. Daytime it's a choir, woodpeckers, chipmunks, the garble of families trying to put tents up. Night is teeth, distant scrapes. A fox coughing in the brush sounds like someone trying not to cry. I walked Loop A, then Loop C, sweeping my headlamp through Ponderosa and Deadfall. The ash in the pits blew like gray lace. Wind moved in slow pushes through the needles. On the 3rd night, smoke joined the wind. It came as a smear on the northern horizon at sunset, then a band, then a wall. We had a lightning bust 2 days earlier across the county line, and one of the strikes had finally found its calling. 11 p.m. The smoke made my flashlight look like it had dandruff. I could taste it on my tongue, papery and stale. The radio picked up unconcerned chatter from Engine 612 staging near Old Highway 11. "Stay off 11, Grant said over the county channel. "We've got a dozer cutting line. Night Rover, you copy?" "Copy," I said, staying on the loops. I was at the far end of Loop C, near the trailhead for Marker Ridge. There's a small trail register there, an ammo can with a notebook so old the covers have curled. People write bears and saw Bigfoot Lowell, and sometimes usefully turned back after 2 miles. Mud. I shone my light across the lid. The smoke hissed against my ears like soda fizz. I opened the can, flipped to the last page, and saw my name. Ranger Eli, 9 p.m., Walking Ridge to check for campers. I hadn't written that. I had been on the campground loops all evening. I checked the timestamp. It was in my handwriting. I closed the notebook, put it back, and for reasons I can't defend, looked up the ridge. The first 3 trail markers on Marker Ridge count up from the campground. 1, 2, 3, then it gets steeper and turns into switchbacks. Everyone knows this because you brag or complain about it over morning coffee. I swung my light to the post by the trailhead. Mile 3. It should have said Mile 1. I remembered the 3rd rule from the addendum. I could picture the curly photocopy font. Do not rationalize. I started to step backward, keeping my light on the marker. The smoke pushed harder, thickened. Somewhere, a branch cracked with a sound like a bone snapped across a knee. My radio gave a single cool electronic ping, a tone I didn't recognize, and then the county channel went silent except for a hiss. "Count 30 seconds, the rules said. I counted. Out loud. My voice sounded small. At 22, someone said my name behind me in a conversational tone, like I'd stepped out of a room during a story. "Eli?" I turned so fast my boots slid in the dust. No one was there. The beam of my light was busy hitting smoke. "Eli," the voice said again, and it was exactly like Grant's, worn and amused. "You're fine. Stop dramatizing." I could have sworn it came from the trees between the campsites and the ridge, 30 feet away, where someone might be leaning on a trunk finishing a cigarette. I raised my radio to my mouth, but I didn't say the H word. I remembered Rule 4. "Say again," I said. "You're breaking up." No reply. The radio hissed like it was trying not to laugh. I took 3 more backward steps and nearly walked into a family's hammock straps. The dad inside snorted awake like a horse and sat up, the fabric swallowing him, and muttered something about damn raccoons. I apologized in a whisper and kept moving backward all the way to my truck. I drove straight to the station. Grant was at the dispatch desk, headset crooked on one ear, elbows planted. The map board behind him was lit up with push pins. When I told him about the register and the mile marker and the voice, he removed the headset like it had just become heavy. "Okay," he said. "Okay, first one's on the house. You did right." "On the house. First time the forest notices you," he said, and almost smiled. "If you're unlucky, it'll try to get friendly. Keep the rules. Don't feed strays." He put the headset back on. On the map board, the fire perimeter was a red grease pencil loop the size of a small town. "You think the fire woke it up?" I asked. "Fire wakes up everything," he said. "Go home. Sleep. You're back at midnight." I thought that was a joke. It wasn't. At 12:07 a.m., the pager went off with a chirp that yanked at my spine. The display scrolled a single line. "Call from Mara. No number. Just a name. A first name." Rule 1 hit me between the eyes. Do not answer any call that gives only a first name. The pager vibrated in my hand like a living thing. I set it on the metal desk like it might bite. Dispatch came up on the radio a second later. "Ranger unit on. We've got 911 patching through a caller at Marker Ridge. Female caller. Claims she's lost in hearing people. Name of Mara." Grant keyed up. "Copy. Patch when the line comes back. Have we got a call back?" "Negative. Dropped. Pinging puts her between mile 2 and 4 on the ridge." I didn't sit there and weigh the rules. I grabbed the pack that stays by the door. First aid, Sam splint, triangle bandage, 2 liters quick clot, and jogged to the truck. By the time the engine caught, I was already picturing the switchbacks, the places people lose the tread in the dark, the crumbly spots where the trail sloves away toward the ravine. I told myself the mile markers were right by daylight. I told myself I'd stop at the trail register before I set foot on the dirt, and if my name was there, I didn't finish the sentence. I drove faster. The campground was a soot dream. Under my headlights, the campsites looked abandoned mid-sentence. Folding chairs tipped, a cooler half unlatched, a red bandana tied around a tree limb as if to find later. People were hunkering down in their tents against the smoke or had pulled stakes and left. As I killed the engine, the forest made the sound of breathing. I clipped my radio to my chest, turned my headlamp to medium, and walked straight to the ammo can. I opened it. My name wasn't on the last page. There were 2 fresh entries, both from the late afternoon. Nora plus Leo, going up to 3 back by dark, and M. Carter, trail run, 5 miles. Both had phone numbers scrawled beside them. I took a photo with my phone. The mile 1 post said mile 1. I felt something unclench in my chest. I headed up. The ridge is a long, slow spine until it isn't. The first mile is wine-glass gentle, pine duff soft under your boots. The second mile tilts enough to put you into your lungs. At night, the switchbacks feel like a piano exercise. You turn, you repeat, you turn again. My headlamp pulled 3 steps of trail out of nothing and fed them to me as I moved. Smoke made the beam a tunnel. "County," I said into the mic between breaths. "Ranger Eli starting up Marker Ridge. Can we get that patch if she calls again?" "Copy," dispatch said. "We're trying. Phone's bouncing." A minute later, a voice that wasn't dispatch came into my ear like it had always been there. "Is this the ranger?" a woman said. "Mara?" I said, and then, "Confirm your last name." "Why?" she asked, like I'd asked if I could borrow her coat. "Protocol," I said. Where are you right now? There was a pause, rustling, the hollow echo of breath near the mouthpiece. I can see the river, she said finally. I think. I heard it at least. The ground felt like it was yawning. That wasn't a phrase you get from someone making it up. The ravine does that. White granite peeled open, the river below like aluminum foil dragging itself along the rocks. People get vertigo if they crowd the edge. My head drew a map in the smoke. She was at mile 3, near the drop. Okay, I said. Stay where you are. Aim your phone light upward. Keep it steady. I'm coming to you. They keep telling me to come down, she said. I saw a flashlight. It was high, higher than a person, like up in the branches. Rule 7. Don't follow a flashlight that's bobbing above knee height. Stay put, I said too fast. If someone calls from the trail and they don't identify themselves first by name and title, don't talk to them. I'm Ranger Eli. I will yell Ranger Eli when I'm close. Do you understand? I think so, she said. Can you hurry? It's so loud. Loud? The birds, she said. They're screaming. I stopped walking. There were no birds, not at this hour, not with smoke like this. The forest around me was a quiet so tight it hurt. Mara, I said carefully, keep your light steady. I'm about 10 minutes out. Something clicked in my ear. The line died. I swallowed the urge to say the wrong 4-letter word and upped my pace, switchback to switchback, lungs burning in a slowly damp way. The smoke thickened until every breath tasted like wet fern. My head tilted like a dog's. Wet fern. Rule 6. If the wind shifts and you smell wet fern when it hasn't rained in a week, do not breathe deeply. Turn your head and keep walking. I turned my head, even though it was symbolic at best. I breathed shallow, like sipping air through a straw. The smell was suddenly everywhere, fresh and wrong at the same time, like finding a Christmas tree in July. Up ahead, a light bobbed. It was pale blue, the color of an old LED, and it hung 5 feet above the trail, drifting and dipping like someone trying to decide where to set a lantern. It wasn't attached to a hand. It wasn't attached to anything. It hovered in a slow, uninterested way and then slid off the trail into the trees. Ranger Eli, I said out loud for myself as much as anything. Ranger Eli, Ranger Eli. Footsteps rustled above me, human speed, human weight, a quick, panicked mirror set. I blew my whistle twice. The sound was small in the smoke. Ranger, a woman called. Ranger Eli? Her voice was coming from the left, toward the ravine. I pushed my beam through the trees. It found a pair of legs first, bare calves, one sock bunched, then the rest of her, braced against a stump, hands white on the bark. Her phone light on the ground cast her face up in a cheap campfire way. She looked mid-20s, scrapes on her knees, hair like she'd tried to make a ponytail on the run. Don't move, I said. I'm coming to you. I put both hands on my thighs and slid diagonally on the crumbly duff until I could get my boot heels into the trail bench. When I got close enough, I saw why she was holding on. A chunk of the tread had sloughed toward the ravine, and what looked like a single step was actually a shallow skiff over nothing. The river below made a metallic hush, like tin roof in the wind. Okay, I said. I'm going to put a strap under your arms like a seatbelt. When I say up, you put your feet where I put mine and you don't look down. Ready? She nodded like her neck was rusted. When I reached for her, her skin was cold as if she'd been in water. When my strap slid under her, she flinched. Sorry, she said. Something touched me. What? On my ankle. She swallowed. It said my name in a whisper. It said it like my grandmother. I wanted to tell her, that's a good sentence. That's the kind of sentence that gets you believed. Instead, I said, we're going up. We went up. When we got our boots onto the safe part of the trail, she stood too fast and her head went back like she was listening for something in the trees. Her eyes were glassy. Her pupils were wide in a way I didn't love. Water, I said, and gave her mine. She drank like the bottle had answers. The wet fern smell washed over us again in a green, wet wave. She shuddered. I turned my head like the rule said, but she inhaled by reflex, a long, greedy pull. Her pupils widened further, then pinched, then widened again like something making up its mind. She blinked at me as if I'd moved closer without walking. Is there someone else up here? She asked. No, I said. Just us. Someone keeps saying Ranger Eli, she said, and the way she said the 2 words made them sound like a single proper noun, like a childhood friend. From the trees. He told me to go to the river so the smoke would thin. I wanted to tell her about the addendum. about the rules like nails hammered into old wood, about Wedge Peak and the flashlight and the way the mile markers lie. Instead, I said, "We're going down now." She hesitated, like she was considering a counteroffer someone had made behind me. Then she nodded. We passed the spot where I'd seen the blue light. It was gone. The switchbacks unraveled in reverse under our boots. The smoke thinned without truly thinning, like a trick mirror making a corridor look longer. Twice I thought I heard someone a switchback above us keep pace with our steps. Twice I stopped, and twice the sound was gone. At mile 1, the real mile 1, the birds started. It was like someone had pressed play on a file named forestdawn.wave, except it was midnight and the notes were wrong. The trills came rapid, then stalled, then doubled back. The loud ones were soft. The soft ones were loud. There were a few seconds when every bird seemed to sing at once, and the pitch of it got under the bones behind my ears. Rule 9. At dawn, if the birds are silent for more than 1 minute, but they weren't silent. They were overexposed. Cover your ears, I said. What? Cover your ears, I said again, and put my palms over mine. The sound got worse and better. It pushed like pressure change before a storm. My eyes watered. I could taste copper, which I told myself was adrenaline. Mara thought about it like it was a riddle, and then did it. We walked the last 300 yards like that, hands over our heads like a weird surrender, until the campground opened around us and the chorus cut off like someone had pulled a plug. We didn't talk until we reached my truck. Back at the station, the lights felt too bright. Grant came out of dispatch like he'd been pressed in there by a vice. He scanned Mara with the quick, impersonal inventory you learn when you have more calls than hours. Eyes, gait, breath, bleeding. Then he nodded to himself and his face softened half a notch. "You're okay," he said. "Good. Sit there. Water's there. Vomit bucket there." Mara sat. She didn't vomit, which I took as a win. "You got her name?" Grant asked me. "Yes." He looked at me. "Mara," I said. "No last. The call came in as a first name." He said. "And did you ask for a last name?" "I did," I said. She dodged it. He grunted and wrote Mara on the whiteboard with a question mark. Then he looked back at me and said, "You went up alone." "I did," I said. "We don't have a second on tonight." "You could have waited 10 minutes for the volunteers," he said. "Maybe," I said. And then because I could feel his eyes trying to decide if I was worth training, "She was at the ravine." He nodded once. "Good call," he said, and then to Mara, "Miss, do you have ID?" She patted empty pockets, then laughed once short. "I left my pack by a rock? I was just going up for half an hour to see stars. I didn't plan to." She stopped like the words were hitting bruises. Grant's gaze slid to me in a way that meant go. I went. The campground was emptier now. Trucks had red eyes from idling. A kid cried in that tired, old man way kids cry after midnight. I walked to the Marker Ridge register and opened the can and flipped pages fast, like the words might try to run. There it was, on the second page from the back, dated tonight, in a hand I recognized now because I'd seen it before on the mailbox at the station. Mara Ellison, up to river, back by 10. A phone number with the same area code as the 2 earlier entries. And under that, a second line, written at the same hour in much neater letters. Ranger Eli, met Mara at mile 3, going to river to get out of smoke. I stood there until a mosquito landed on my wrist and drank the thought right out of me. I took a photo. I took the whole notebook. I put the empty ammo can back and closed the lid. Back at the station, Mara had color again. She was telling Grant, in the voice of someone re-watching her own body from across the room, that she went alone because her boyfriend didn't like night hikes, and the smoke looked thin from their campsite, and the stars looked like a promise. She said she heard someone cough behind her around mile 2, and when she turned there was nobody, and when she turned back the trail marker said mile 1 again, and that made her laugh because she thought she'd gotten turned around, except her calves said otherwise. I held up the notebook. "You left your name," I said. "Oh," she said, blinking. "I did? Good for me." She smiled the automatic smile of the unslept and then stopped smiling. "Wait, did you say you wrote something too?" "I didn't," I said. Grant took the notebook, flipped to the page, looked at me, and then, in a small motion I think even he didn't intend to be comforting, placed his hand on the table so my knuckles could bump it. "Wedge Peak is awake," he said, almost to himself. Mara looked between us. What's Wedge Peak? An old fire lookout, I said, which was true. No public access, which was also true. Closed in '98, which was true in a legal way and wrong in another. It's where we used to see trouble coming, Grant said, and smiled without his teeth. Now trouble likes to wave from there after dark. We could have let her sleep on the bench and called her boyfriend in the morning to pick up their tent. We could have written it up as a routine assist and taped the addendum to the inside of my forehead in case I needed to read it again. Instead, at 2:19 a.m., the radio whispered like someone leaning close, Wedge Peak to station. No tone, no call sign, just that slow, careful voice you use when you want to see how a word feels on your mouth. Wedge Peak. Grant reached past me, turned the volume down to a notch above silent, and keyed the mic. Say again. Silence. I wanted to say help, but there's that rule, and even if you don't believe rules, there's a self-consciousness that gets under your tongue after you've read them. Wedge Peak to station, the voice said again, a little more pleased with itself this time. I can see your truck. Headlights look bright. Grant keyed, didn't speak, released. He looked at me. Count 30. We did, together, out loud, in that small room, counting like kids hiding in a dark closet. At 29, the voice said, 20, and chuckled, like we'd told it a joke. Mara stared at the radio like it was telling a ghost story, and also like she recognized the ghost. That sounds like, she began, and then clamped her mouth shut. Who? I asked. Nobody, she said. I don't know. Grant stood. Okay, he said to both of us. We're going to do something I don't prefer. He pulled a key from the bottom of the binder. It had Wedge stamped on it in a font so old it looked chiseled. He slid it across the table to me. Why me? I asked, and knew the answer. The forest had already tried my name on. Because he wants you, he said, and then, almost gently, and because you won't go alone. He lifted his eyebrows at Mara like he was asking if she was still part of this night. She squared her shoulders the way you do when fear humiliates you and you want to humiliate it back. What's at the tower? She asked. 3 flights of stairs, an empty chair, a window that looks at everything, Grant said, and a door we sometimes forget to keep shut. He looked past us at the dark map board. The grease pencil perimeter had changed shape during the last hour. The fire was licking closer to the far northern boundary, the one that shared a ridge line with the tower. You'll take the north road, he said. No one else on it this late. Drop below the saddle. If you smell wet fern, don't breathe deep. If the birds go loud, cover your ears. If you see a second moon. What? Mara asked, half laughing. Don't look at either, he said. We packed 2 headlamps, extra batteries, a spare hand radio. I clipped the wedge key to my belt like I had earned it. The night outside had thinned into the false dawn that comes when smoke eats starlight and makes its own sky. As we pulled out, the radio whispered, Ranger Ely, like the syllables were a candy it wanted to make last. I did not answer it. I did not say help. I drove. The North Road is dirt even when the forest gets money. It will always be dirt. It wound us up through chaparral and pine, past boulders shaped like latched shoulders. We passed no cars. Twice, a deer broke into the beam and went up a slope like water. The smoke from the fire pulled a curtain across the far ridges and made the world feel small. At the saddle, the road narrowed and steepened. The tower rose out of the slope like a wooden metronome, each leg planted in a block of poured concrete. At night, its silhouette looks like something built by a smart child alone. The stair flights zigzag under the cab. The windows on the cab are black squares. Stay behind me on the stairs, I said to Mara. If something's on a step that shouldn't be, I'll hit it first. That's supposed to make me feel better, she said, but she smiled because the only other option was to cry. At the bottom of the stairs, the air smelled like wet fern. Mara inhaled and swayed, and then clenched her jaw and looked furious at her own lungs. I turned my head, breathed shallow, and put my boot on the first step. We climbed. Stairs at night are arithmetic. You count them even when you don't. Flight 1, landing, turn. Flight 2, landing, turn. Halfway up the second flight, something above us tapped the railing, a tiny, prim sound like a fingernail on glass. Mara stopped, her hand tightened on the railing and found mine the way magnets find. I squeezed once and let go. Ranger Ely, a voice said from the cab above, as if it were reading it off a name tag on a welcome desk. You took your time. It wasn't Grant's voice. It wasn't the voice from the radio exactly. It was a version of my own I didn't know I had. How I might sound 10 years older, or more tired, or smiling with my mouth closed. I felt the back of my neck go cold in a way that didn't have anything to do with altitude. "Don't talk to it," I said, not very steadily, and we kept climbing. At the catwalk, the wind tried to take our balance. Smoke pushed and ebbed. The door to the cab was closed with a padlock. My key slid home like it had been waiting. The lock released with a grouchy click. I put my hand on the handle and looked at Mara. "Ready?" I asked. "No," she said, honestly. I opened the door. The tower cab is a square room with windows on all sides and a map table in the center. At some point, someone had removed the old Osborne firefinder. The circular mount sat like a wedding ring left on a dresser. A folding chair leaned against the back wall. The room was empty. Empty except for the trail register notebook on the map table. My notebook, the one I had taken from the ammo can. Open to a page I hadn't photographed yet. There were 2 entries on the open page, written in parallel, one in a fast, impatient scrawl, one in a neat schoolteacher's hand. The first said, "Ranger Eli arrived at Wedge Peak." The second said, "Mara arrived at Wedge Peak." Someone, thing, had written for us. Or before us. I stepped closer. The neat hand had drawn a tiny map beneath the names. A square for the tower, a line down to a dot labeled river, another line along the ridge to 3 short parallel slashes I recognized as the old cut line where we sometimes sank a saw team in August. At the end of that, a circle. The label under the circle was a single word in block letters, patient and proud. Mouth. Mara read it the same time I did. "Like a cave?" she asked, too loud. The tower absorbed her voice and gave nothing back. The radio at my chest crackled. No tone, no channel ID, just the click and shiver of a mic waking. "Ranger Eli," my own voice said from the speaker, pitched wrong, dragged like a recording slowed by a greasy finger. "Bring her down." Mara looked at me with an expression that was about to decide whether I was the dangerous one. I shook my head so fast my neck twinged. The floorboards under us ticked once, the way old boards do when humidity shifts. Then the birds started again. It was quieter this time, but closer. The wrong dawn sang just outside the glass. I pressed my palms to my ears. Mara did the same a half-beat later. Through the ringing I heard another sound, the smallest scrape, as if a fingertip were being drawn along the outside of the window, pausing at each corner to feel where the wood ended. Something was up on the roof, I realized, or close enough to put a hand down from the eaves. It tapped the glass, gentle as a friend. Tap, tap. And then in a voice that had my cadence exactly but the consonants of someone else, it said, "Please." I didn't say help. I didn't say help. I didn't say anything. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a Sharpie and wrote on the trail register page under the map, "No, going back." Closed the door. Mara watched my hand, then took the pen and wrote, "Not ours." We left the tower as quietly as you can leave when your knees knock. I relocked the padlock by feel. On the stairs, the wet fern smell made one last push. At the bottom, the birds cut off, clean as a guillotine. The north road unspooled under the truck. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. The radio stayed asleep, and I was grateful until I understood that meant it was listening. At the saddle, something white moved in the corner of my eye. I told myself deer. I told myself tarp. I told myself a bird with the wrong wings. "Did you hear what it said?" Mara asked suddenly, voice low, like you talk in a church when you need to admit a sin. "In the tower?" I said. "Yeah." "No," she said. "Before, on the ridge, when it was whispering like my grandmother." "What did it say?" I asked, although I didn't want to know. She stared ahead where the headlights figured the road into existence. It said it's hungry, and then it said it learns the names first. We didn't speak the rest of the way to the station. We made reports that looked like we were trying not to get laughed out of a courtroom. We used words like auditory phenomenon and odor present, despite dry conditions and possible prank and unknown third party. I left out the map and the word mouth and the way the notebook had turned pages on its own. I put the notebook in a Ziploc and locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I slept badly and dreamed worse. In the morning, my phone had 3 missed calls from a number that matched the one under M. Trail run, 5 miles. I called back. A woman answered on the first ring. "Did you find her?" she said. My friend, Mara. She texted me at 9 that she was going up alone and then stopped answering. She always texts when she's back. I figured maybe her battery died. But then, the voice broke. Then I got a call from an unknown number at 1:30 that said her name like somebody was practicing. I hung up. I thought it was a scam. We did find her, I said, and realized I had made a mistake I didn't have a name for. She's safe. Oh, the woman said in a voice that couldn't decide whether to stand or sit. Good, thank God, thank you. We hung up. I stared at the wall until the paint bumps made a map. Then I went to see Grant. He was standing at the bulletin board, pin in his teeth, trying to keep 3 different agencies' flyers from sliding down behind the cork. Without turning, he said, "You shouldn't have answered that call." "How did you—" "You smell like decisions," he said, and turned, and for once looked his age. I told him about the friend, about the unknown number, about my mouth making promises before my head caught up. He rubbed his face. "We've always had it," he said finally. "Some places have the whistle in the bog, some have lights in coal shafts, we have a mouth in the rock that learns our words." "That's not comforting," I said. "It isn't meant to be," he said, and then softening. "But we also have rules. And we have each other. That's how you get old out here." "How old are you?" I asked, because it felt like the only safe question. "Older than I look," he said. "You going to be back tonight?" There was a joke available, and I didn't take it. "Yeah," I said, "I'll be back." He nodded, satisfied, like this too was a rule. That night, the fire made a run toward the river. Engines staged at the saddle. The sky went the color of a bruise that never heals. We stayed off 11. We listened to dozer chatter and weather reports, and once, carefully, to a voice that said from the North Channel in a radio I knew wasn't ours, "Ranger Eli, come down." We didn't answer. We counted 30. We counted again. At 3:58 a.m., the birds were silent for a minute and a half. We got low. We covered our ears. And somewhere, up on the ridge where the stone splits and the river talks to itself like a man in a bad marriage, a door we can't see opened and closed, and something that had been practicing our names said them both once, perfectly, and, like it had manners after all, stopped. 3 nights after Wedge Peak, the park felt different. It wasn't the fire, though that was bad enough. The perimeter maps kept being redrawn, and the air was thick enough that my teeth felt dusty. It wasn't the tourists either. Most had left. The campground loops were half empty and silent, except for the hum of generators from the crews. It was the feeling that I was being waited for. The first time it happened was while I was topping off the water tank in my truck at the ranger station. My radio clicked, just once. No voice, just the click. And then I heard Mara's voice, not over the radio, but from somewhere behind the maintenance shed. "Eli? It's me. Come here." It was her tone from that night on the ridge, breathless, uncertain. But there was something else in it, like the syllables had been chewed on before being said. I walked slowly toward the corner of the shed, keeping my hand on the truck door. I didn't round it. I just leaned enough to see. There was no one there. But the gravel in that strip had fresh depressions, heel to toe, like someone barefoot had stood there shifting their weight. When I told Grant, he didn't look surprised. "It knows 2 names now," he said, like it was a math problem he'd been expecting to solve. "That means it's getting hungry again." Again. That word stuck. "How do you stop it?" I asked. "You don't," he said. "You give it enough distance and enough rules that it forgets you before it learns the 3rd. By the 5th night, the fire crews had been pushed back toward the old cut line, the one marked on that page in the trail register, the one that ended at the circle labeled mouth. It was inevitable, I guess, that someone would call it in. At 1:22 a.m., the North Road engine crew reported a hiker's headlamp moving along the cut line toward the ridge. The smoke made it impossible to send the helicopter. The only people close enough to intercept were me and Grant. We both knew what that meant. "You think it's a lost hiker?" I asked. "Could be," he said. "Could also be what you think it is. Either way, we don't want them walking into the mouth." "Then let's go," I said, already grabbing my pack. Grant's jaw flexed. "No, I go alone." "That's not how I started, but he cut me off. "It is tonight. You've already been up there once. That's enough of your scent for it." It was the first time I'd seen real fear under his voice. I stayed behind, but I couldn't make myself sit still. I stood at the station window, watching the smoke shift over the saddle. I told myself I wouldn't answer the radio unless it was official. At 2:04 a.m., it came. "Eli," Grant's voice said. "Come down here, quick." My throat went tight. The rules screamed in my head. Do not answer a first name. Wait for dispatch. But it sounded exactly like him. Exactly. Even the crack in his tone when he'd run out of breath. I didn't answer. I counted, out loud. At 24, the voice said, "If you don't come now, she won't make it." She, Mara. I grabbed my radio, thumb hovering over the button, and froze. Because on the far edge of the North Road, through the smoke, I could see a headlamp moving, and there were two shadows walking together. I couldn't sit still. I loaded the truck and started for the saddle, telling myself I'd just get eyes on them and call it in. The smoke had a strange glow that night. Not orange, not firelight, more like a moon behind clouds. As I got closer to the cut line, I realized the glow wasn't coming from the sky at all. It was ahead of me, bleeding through the tree line like dawn arriving at the wrong hour. I killed my engine and stepped out. The silence was so deep it felt like I'd gone deaf. Then, not slowly, but all at once, the birds started. It wasn't the loud, chaotic chorus from before. This was worse. It was perfect. Every note was on time, every species in sync, like a soundtrack someone had looped. It was beautiful in the same way a wax figure is beautiful. Close enough to real that your brain wants to relax, but wrong enough that your spine won't. Rule 9 said, if the birds are silent for more than 1 minute, get low and cover your ears. But what about birds that sound too real? I didn't know, so I covered my ears anyway. That's when I saw them. Two figures side by side, walking toward the glow. One was Grant, or looked like him, right down to the posture and the radio harness. The other was a woman with hair pulled into a loose knot. I thought it was Mara until I realized her headlamp was off, and yet her face was lit from below. I shouted for Grant. Neither turned. They just kept walking into the false daylight until the glow swallowed them and I was alone on the ridge. I followed. The glow got brighter with each step until I didn't need my own light. The trees thinned, then stopped. I was standing at the edge of a basin, and at the far end of it, in the exposed granite, was an opening. It wasn't a cave, not exactly. It was too round, too smooth, like the stone had melted and been punched through. Around the edge, the granite was discolored, black in places, green in others, like old copper, and from inside came the sound of moving air, steady and slow, like something asleep and breathing. Grant was standing 10 feet from the opening, facing in. The woman beside him turned her head toward me, and that's when I knew it wasn't Mara. Her eyes reflected the light the way animal eyes do, except they didn't flash. They glowed, constant. "Don't come closer," Grant said without looking back. The woman spoke in a voice that sounded like both Mara and my own, layered. "It already knows your name. Why fight it?" The air from the opening shifted, and the smell of wet fern rolled over me so hard my knees locked. "Step back," I told Grant, my voice shaking. "We're leaving." "This is leaving," he said, and took another step forward. Something moved in the dark behind him. Not a shape, more like the absence of shape. The light from the basin didn't touch it. It leaned forward, and the opening seemed to widen for it. "Grant," I said again. The woman smiled at me, and I realized her teeth were wrong. Too many in front, small and even, like a fish. Then the birds went silent. Grant's shoulders twitched, just once, like he'd heard a voice behind him. Then he stepped into the dark. The woman followed, and as soon as she did, the opening shifted. Not closed, exactly, but narrowed, like a mouth deciding it had bitten enough. I ran. The false daylight faded in 3 steps. My headlamp beam felt like a toy. The smell of wet fern chased me all the way to the tree line. When I reached the truck, the radio clicked twice. Then Grant's voice said, "Eli, it's quieter here. You should see." I didn't answer. I drove until the glow was gone behind me. We never found Grant. The official report says he was lost during a rescue attempt, likely disoriented by smoke. Crews searched for 5 days. The cut line is closed now, officially for hazardous erosion. But I've heard the night crews still hear voices out there. Mara left 2 days after that. She didn't say goodbye, but she left a note under my truck wiper that just said, "It's still hungry." The addendum in the binder has a 10th bullet point now, handwritten in black Sharpie, 10. If the mouth learns your name, transfer out before the season ends. It's not forgetting anymore. I still work here. I still walk the loops at night. And every now and then, just as I'm finishing my shift, the radio will click, and a voice, sometimes mine, sometimes not, will say my name, like it's practicing the way it will sound when it says it for the last time.